All right. I now welcome representatives from Angel Flight via video conference. For the Hansard record, could you please each give your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Yes, I'm Owen Crease. I'm the chair of the Angel Flight board.
Good morning, Senators. It's Marjorie Pagani, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer and a Director of the board. And I'm having trouble getting my camera on. I'm sorry.
No worries, Ms. Pagani. I am going to ask you if you have a brief opening statement that you wish to make.
I do. Thank you very much, Senator McDonald. May I, though, have the liberty of addressing this committee very briefly on the previous matter of Moorabbin, just simply to say that that is a critical airport for Angel Flight. We do hundreds and hundreds of flights in and out of Moorabbin as the primary Victorian airport every year, so it would really have a dramatic effect on what is an important service down there. May I also, very briefly, with your permission, address the previous witness from the ATSB. I was quite shocked to hear the witness say they didn't share their data information with CASA. I haven't got the transcript of the previous hearing with me. However, Mr. Nat Naji and Mr. Greg Hood, then Commissioner, both gave evidence to the contrary. Indeed, they said they shared the data with CASA because that was part of their collaborative processes. So I was quite amazed at that. The other issue there is they have admitted they modelled their data, which means they made it up from various sources, where in the circumstances, Angel Flight had given the ATSB, not only given them the database of Angel Flight, but paid a lot of money to have code written to enable them to interpret that database and cross-section it against Air Services data. So all of those things took me aback a little, I must say. That data was also, as a segue into the CASA matter, that data was also given to the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, and they had told us they didn't use our data from our database because it couldn't be trusted. And what we did is we had offered a declaration from the writer of the compiler of that database, who was prepared to swear that he'd done a check on all of our figures and that they were accurate, and he knew that because he wrote and administered that database, but CASA told us that our data couldn't be trusted. Further on that issue, the ASB and CASA both relied on BITA data, and I've said things in my submission about that, but and clearly CASA could have seen that was incorrect because BITA said there were approximately 40, 45 aircraft all over Australia that had flown in a 3-year period, 2014 onwards, where we were able to show them that at any one time, in any 1 year, we had about 247 to 250 aircraft in the air, and that's just Angel Flight. But apropos of that, last year, I again took issue with BITA about their publication of data on CSFs. And bear in mind, when they did the relevant 2014 to 17 compilation, there was no such thing as a CSF, nor was it defined in the terms it is now, or at all. Last year, I took that up with a senior officer at BITA and said, look, clearly your data's wrong again. You're still talking about 40 or 50 aircraft. Here's our data, just us. And the email I got back, and I have that email, said, yes, we know it is in error, but we've got a publication date to meet. And I have that email. So moving on to the core of our matter, and I have sent a fairly comprehensive submission in, so I'll take that as read, and I'm not just going to repeat what's in there. But a couple of significant matters, senators. As we sit here in 2021, we get the distinct feeling of deja vu. We are in exactly the same position as we were back in 2018 when, after working on an MOU or CAP with CASA's community engagement team and with the approval of then DAS, Mr Carmody, Mr Monaghan walked into my office in Brisbane with a scratched out, handwritten couple of pages of notes and said to effect, here's the new regulations, they're going to be in place in 2 weeks. Not one of which bore any relationship to the discussions we've been having for the last 18 months with CASA. Indeed, I now know that none of the CASA community engagement team knew anything about this either, and none of which, now admitted by Mr Monaghan in court, had anything whatsoever to do with the 2 CSF accidents that have happened since 2003. Now, our concern is we are facing the same thing. Here we are with an instrument proven and admitted by CASA in court to have no relationship whatsoever to CSF accidents, no data, no risk analysis ever done, and yet that will repeal of its own volition in March. And here we are only a few months out yet again, and we had, as of last month, no contact whatsoever by CASA. So we took it upon ourselves to make sure a meeting happened. We finally got a meeting. At that meeting, it was revealed to us, and indeed it seemed like a slip of the tongue because nobody had spoken to us of any analysis, survey or risk analysis, anything at all. The DAS at that stage said, well, we have got a document and it's going out on Wednesday. And I said, well, Wednesday, what is this all about? Oh, yes, we've struck a survey and we're going to send it out. And I said, well, when were you going to tell us about it? That conversation went on to effect that we were told by the DAS and Mr Monaghan that we would have 24 hours to look at that survey. We did spend a lot of time and energy getting that increased to 3 working days. The survey, as it was then, and largely as it is now, is a completely useless document. It simply asks various people whether they think there are any positive or negative effects of the CSF regulations. And once again, as happened in 2018-19, no risk analysis is done, no safety case. I can't tell you, senators, how many times I asked Mr Monaghan, where is your safety case? His first answer, which was a correct one as it transpired, is we don't need one. We don't need a safety case. We asked again at our recent meeting, where's the risk analysis? When was that going to be prepared? There is none. And so clearly the intent of CASA is to simply go down exactly the same track as it did last time, notwithstanding, clearly in the court case, we have a series of admissions by Mr Monaghan that they had no information whatsoever upon which to base that legislation. But what is significant here, senators, as well, and I've attached a table of questions and answers, both before the AREC committee in September 2019 and in the court. And all of those questions and answers show that CASA grossly misled the AREC committee. Senators, you will recall, and I remember speaking at that time to you, Senator McDonald, and to Senator Sterle, and Senator Patrick, indeed. And there was a lot of questions about, we've asked you several times to bring in effect, your safety case, your risk analysis, Where is it? More data to support your legislation. And on every occasion, the CASA representative said, in effect, yes, we've got it, we'll give it to you. We now know, in accordance with what Mr Monaghan had told me originally, they don't need a safety case, that they never did one. And Mr Monaghan was forced under fairly rigorous cross-examination, I might say, in court to admit that. He didn't, he wasn't very forthcoming, but after being put upon by the cross-examiner, he then started making those admissions. So here we are again. Nothing has changed, but it is worse than it was, because we now know, courtesy of the court case, that all of the answers they gave to you, senators, was wrong. Not only was that from Messrs Monaghan and Crawford, and principally Mr Monaghan, but Dr Alec also said, and I refer you to item 6 on table 1 of our submissions, where the doctor was asked by Senator Patrick about the additional requirements of community service flights. Dr Alex said this, but similarly, it's recognised in the federal aviation policy on this that a private pilot licence is an entry-level requirement and that community service flying is different. That was evidence to this committee. It was wrong. He was wrong. There is no such policy. I've certainly searched as well as I can, and I've not been able to find such a policy. So we have, even at that level, misleading statements to this inquiry. And senators, you will all, of course, recall that you were critical on the last occasion of certain things and recommended to CASA that they amend that legislation, and they, of course, chose to ignore that. I want to move on, and we talked about data earlier, and I've written in my submissions, but I just want to summarise. From the outset, Mr Monaghan said, and this first statement was made at a meeting in Canberra with myself, our founder, Mr Bill Bristow, and Mr Carmody, Crawford and Monaghan, that Angel Flight was 16 times more likely to have an accident than other sectors of general aviation. Senators, you can only imagine what that did to our operation in terms of public confidence, public relations, and of course donations. And we are, of course, the only organisation of our type in Australia that does not seek government funding. He then revised that down to 9 times. Then, and I have communications to this effect, then 8 times, then 7 times. Then we got to court, it was 5 times. And then once we got in court, he admitted there was no reliable data to support that at all. So that's where we sit. And CASA, notwithstanding all of those changes of position by Mr Monaghan, never withdrew any of those misleading statements which were published. A real tragedy for our country people and their confidence, because the data showed conclusively that the CSF sector is in the same, nothing significantly different from any other GA operation. But I want to just quickly move on to this issue of CASA's modus operandi. The data was admittedly not correct. What we did is we sought and got some internal correspondence in the court proceedings relating to the discussions between senior officers. Now, I'm not permitted to give those to you because CASA made an objection in the federal court to us using those for any purpose but for the interim or indeed interlocutory hearing in this matter, which was quite some time ago. We attempted to put those matters before the court in the substantive hearing. And CASA ultimately, at Angel Flight's expense, I have to say, objected to that, took a technical point and made a big issue successfully of not allowing the court to see the internal documents. My strong suggestion to you, senators, is you have the power to demand these internal documents from CASA to show what the staff thought of Mr Monaghan's proposals and data. I can also tell you that I have since had some fairly recent conversations with what in another forum may become evidence from staff members, CASA. I can't reveal names and I apologise for that, although I am prepared to say a little more in camera. But I can say the substance of those conversations is to effect that senior internal staff were shocked at what Mr Monaghan proposed for Angel Flight, had taken the view that the data was fabricated, there was no basis and it was not supported, and that all of this was ignored by Mr Monaghan. This seems to be the way CASA did and continues to operate. I mentioned briefly a matter before the Campbelltown local court in New South Wales currently between ASA and an aviator. And again, I can give more details of that and urge you senators to order a transcript of this, which, as you would know, transcripts are quite expensive. But in that matter, which is in substance relating to charges against CASA that they fabricated information and they engaged in bribery and other serious matters against this person. They have been objecting to providing subpoenaed material, in that case for 3 years, such that in July of this year, the judge said, the judge was clearly from the transcript very angry, and said, is it going to be necessary for me to subpoena the CEO of CASA, issue a summons for her arrest, to bring her before this court to explain why you will not provide this information? CASA's only explanation through legal was to the effect that it was all a bit slow because of it. In the August hearing, CASA, to avoid providing the subpoenaed documents, withdrew 2 of its witness statements, which were relevant to the documents, so as to not have to do it. I mention that only because it is more of the same. This is not a transparent authority. This is not one which is fair to the aviation community. And it is one which, by its current conduct of failing to engage with Angel Flight at all in November, notwithstanding all the admissions made in the court case, is continuing on that same path. We had really hoped that there would be some changes made, but it seems, and I can only say this from video conferences I've had and communications, that Mr Monaghan is still running the show and intent on imposing further legislation, again, with clearly no intention to do a risk-based analysis in relation to that. I would like, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but I simply have to say that the sad part is here we are again, despite what has gone on and what the Senate's recommendations were, nothing has changed. Aviation will suffer from a loss of Angel Flight. There is no doubt. Over 3,000 pilots, not all in the air at the one time, many of whom tell us they would not fly but for Angel Flight. It gives them value and purpose. And of course, it helps hundreds of thousands of people across this nation. why they are intent, or they, I can only say Mr. Monaghan, quite frankly, because my information and my personal contact is to that effect, continues down this path, seems to me at best disappointing and at worst unfair and illogical. But I've asked our chair, Dr. Creese, if it sits well with you, senators, to say a few words from the perspective of being chair and a statistician. And of course, he has himself conducted more than 600 flights out of South Australia for Angel Flight. So over to Dr. Creese.
Thank you, Ms. Pagani and senators. I first of all have to say I agree entirely with the sentiments that Ms. Pagani has expressed. As you would expect, we've discussed this matter at quite some length prior to today. But I would like to just say that as a pilot, I've found that the very contentious legislative instrument that has been imposed on us has had absolutely no safety benefit at all, and I wouldn't have expected it to. But it has cost me money, it's cost me flying time, and it's caused me a considerable personal inconvenience. Just on the maintenance requirements alone, that's cost me almost $4,000 over the 2.5 years that I wouldn't have otherwise had to spend. And as chair of Angel Flight, when I took on that responsibility, I was already acutely aware of the fractious relationship that existed between Angel Flight and CASA, because I was heavily involved in preparing evidence for the case. And as Marjorie said, I have a bit of a background in statistics, so I have done a fairly comprehensive analysis of the Angel Flight data. And in fact, I continue to maintain that as an up-to-date data set, which is currently up to date to the 30th of November of this year. That shows that compared to the closest I can find to similar general private aviation activities, other private flying is about 3.5 times, has about 3.5 times the accident rate of Angel Flight operations. So completely the opposite to CASA's contention. When I took on the role of chair, one of my objectives, probably my highest priority, was to try and reset the relationship with CASA. I see that as a critical issue for both parties. And I contacted the CEO directly to express that opinion. As Ms. Pagani said, we've had some communication since, and I'd like to be able to say that I've seen some progress. But sadly, again, as Ms. Pagani said, nothing seems to have changed. I feel as though we are exactly where we were in December 2018, facing exactly the same situation. I've actually pressed CASA for some assurance that if we continue to discuss the voluntary agreement that was almost completed 3 years ago, that we wouldn't be wasting our time again. I've yet to have a response to convince me that we won't be wasting our time, although it's so important to us that we will continue to pursue it anyway. So just as in summary then, do I think this current Civil Aviation Act is fit for purpose? Absolutely not. Do I think CASA is doing a good job for general aviation? Absolutely not. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'm happy to help with the questions.
Hard to know where to begin. I think this was one of the very first inquiries that I did come into the Senate, was on Angel Flight, and it beggars belief that relationship has so fundamentally failed. I agree with you. Some of the conversations I've had with the executive would demonstrate a lack of understanding of what Angel Flight does, a lack of understanding of how big Australia is, a lack of understanding about the failure of general aviation in Australia broadly under CASA's regulations, lack of understanding that, sure, there may be commercial flights available into some regional centres. I mean, it's much worse after COVID, but it's so horrifically expensive that for somebody having regular treatment, the idea of the cost and the trauma of travelling, you know, getting to a commercial flight and sitting, you know, sick amongst a lot of other people is just. Anyway, I support the work that Angel Flight does, and I know thousands of people across Australia do. And this appalling disrespect for the Senate, for the lack of transparency on data that we've asked for, on the demonstration of why these regulations, which were Angel Flight specific, were required. Crickets, absolute crickets from CASA. And this is not the first legal case either that I just wonder if there's some desire within the regulator to crush people, if there's some desire to see people lose their homes, their businesses, their will to live, because they cannot ever seem to sort something out in an appropriate, non-legalistic manner. And this applies across generally aviation more broadly. Now, I'm a glasses half full person, otherwise I wouldn't be in politics. And I do feel a sense of renewal under the new DAS. I am very optimistic that that person and the executive is aware that they have some problems and that there is some cultural change happening in that organisation. But today will be a great demonstration when we hear from CASA later today about what they intend to do with this instrument that expires in March of next year, and what sort of framework they're going to allow for Australians who want to be able to travel by air across this country. I'm very, very disappointed to hear that this has not progressed in a sensible manner. I've been following the court case, and from what I could see, you know, like other cases that I have raised in estimates and in other places where CASA's legal team has acted like bullies by continuing to hide documentation, to ensure that there's no transparency, and to use a very big stick to solve problems. I'm very, very sorry to hear that. I guess these are all questions that we have to put to CASA later this afternoon. Senator Sterle, I'm sorry, do you have any questions that you want to raise?
Chair, I listened intently to Ms. Pagani's evidence, and you know, when we hear terms, and it's pricked my ears, but I mean, fabricated, misleading the Senate, bribery. This is some pretty serious stuff, and I know it's going to happen. I'm going to be very balanced here for once, which is normally not me. And Dr. Allett will get up there and speak in lingo jingo that lawyers all love. He'll come out with an alphabet soup, a gob full of it. I think we should have a private meeting, you and I and the chair. I don't know if I'm in any desire to sit down and listen to CASA's normal avoidance of questioning at this stage, because this is pretty serious stuff. Now, everyone gets the opportunity to defend their actions. I haven't followed the court case, but what I would say is that we should have a private meeting before we progress to CASA, if we progress to CASA today, which I think we should. But anyway, that's something that you and I should have a chat about. Okay.
Senators, may I just add a comment here? And it's the overview, well put, of course, that Senator McDonald just gave us about people in remote places and how hard it is for them, and people who haven't been there don't know. And Senator McDonald summed it up. But I want to give you one example, and I have correspondence to this effect, where I was objecting to one or all but one particular item in the instrument where people are limited to either another crew member or a person who is on board for the support and assistance of a passenger. So I had a problem just after the enactment of this instrument where I had a new migrant with very little English who was breastfeeding 7-month-old twins and had another child, and the husband were all going off to Sydney from very, very remote Western New South Wales. And one of the twins was the patient. So clearly the mother was there for the support and assistance of that twin. I asked Mr. Monaghan, what about the other twin? Because that person, 7-month-old, wasn't there for the of the patient, which was the first twin. Said, well, in a small Western day for this breastfed child while the family all went to Sydney for treatment, or they can get a charter for that child.
Can I just?
I don't think I need to say.
No, I'm sorry, you do. Chair, sorry, Miss Pagani broke up. I got the gist of it, but could I ask through you, Chair, that Miss Pagani could just repeat?
Yes.
We got the one of the patients was one of the 7-month-old, and then you broke up.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, the little twins were being breastfed, and there's a rule that CASA has imposed that that only persons who are there for the support and assistance of the patient may go. My question to Mr. Monaghan was, well, the other twin clearly isn't there for the support and assistance of the first twin, but they're both being breastfed, so what am I to do? He suggested that one of the twins could stay behind and be cared for by somebody. Don't know, this is a newly arrived immigrant family in a little Western New South Wales town, or they could get a charter for that twin.
Do you have that in writing? Is that an email or is it over the phone?
I do have the email, and I shall dig it out and send it to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So what happened?
Luckily, this is a privileged area. We took both twins, notwithstanding the legislation.
All right. So contrary to CASA's interpretation of the rules, you just decided you were going to take both twins and, I won't use fucking language, but and
I had to decide whether, in my opinion, the second twin could be of support and assistance to the first twin, and I decided for emotional reasons that he could.
And the reason being that, there's obviously no common sense coming this, Mr. Monaghan, get ready, because you know the questions are going to come at you, so you better be prepared, but don't try and bull dust your way out of it, because they're listening. There's no avenue for compassion. There's no avenue for, hang on, this is a different set of circumstances. It is just typical cut dry. Everything's black and white in CASA as well. We get that. And then we understand, and CASA will come up, they want everyone safe in the air. Yes, we do too, yeah, and all that. But is there any reason, was there any reason why a 7-month-old twin who was being breastfed by his or her mother would make the flight any more dangerous? Was there any?
Well, I couldn't make any sense of it myself. But what it did show, Senator, is that, and we know Mr. Monaghan has got very little flying experience, no country GA experience, and certainly no CSF experience. No, and haven't bothered to find out is what really happens. What is the real world out there with these people in little country towns?
Sure.
And not only, they talk about, well, why don't you just use jets? And as Senator McDonald rightly said, there's an awful lot of places don't have jets in Australia. But picture, and I've said this to them in my submissions, picture the mum and the dad and the twins, or similar, getting into Sydney Airport with baby chairs and push carts and crying sick children, and then getting their way over to Manly or Randwick Children's Hospital on the M1, or paying hundreds of dollars for a taxi to do that. And if they drive, how do they find the way? How do they park? It is a nightmare. The ground travel is a nightmare. And there is no understanding, and Senator McDonald hit that on the head, there is no understanding by these people of what happens in rural Australia. And that I gave to you as an example of the culture that must change in this organisation.
All right, let me then just ask you, if I may, Chair, Ms. Pagani. So what would the penalty be for the action that your organisation took when you ignored CASA's direction? And please don't get wound up on the words. So
no,
you
no,
actually,
it wouldn't be us, Senator. It wouldn't. When this whole thing started,
all right.
I volunteered to CASA, come into our office, look at how we operate, look at our documents, look at what we do, look how careful we are. And that was voluntary because we are not an AOC holder. And I had said to him, but I want to work with you. We don't have to because we're not. And his response to me was, Marjorie, we can't regulate you, so we will regulate your pilots. And they are the ones who would be prosecuted.
All right. Okay. So help me out. So what possible penalty could that pilot face that took the twins, both twins, because the directive from CASA was circumvented or whatever? Do you know?
I don't know the current penalty unit rate, but certainly a monetary penalty plus a conviction is possible. And if I can segue that into this whole issue, when CASA, it told them it wanted to know how many flights they'd done for data purposes. It told us it wanted to do it for compliance purposes. However, the letters the pilots got who didn't, and owners who didn't respond quickly, were told facing prosecution, monetary conviction. Applies across the board. And that was not under the CSF. It can be an offence. And they reminded our pilots and owners in the middle of COVID, and they couldn't get to their aeroplanes. We intervened to try to help them. And yet you have CASA in the court in Campbelltown saying we haven't answered a subpoena for 3 years because of COVID. So again, that culture, it's all said earlier, Senator. So.
Okay, all right. So just if I can, thank you. I'm trying to see all the people listening out there ready with baseball bats to give CASA a whack on the nut. Would then think, well, hang on, when you say conviction, like, does that mean they're going to go to jail? Does that mean they lose their operator's ticket? Does that mean they're going to have to sell their house? Or is it just, they've got to go down and make a $10 donation to the Royal Flying Doctor? Do you have any idea?
Probably just a monetary penalty, but they could have that offence recorded. And recall that when one wants to get an AOC or be a chief pilot and other positions, one has to be deemed by CASA to be a fit and proper person. One might be deemed not to be if there is a conviction.
Okay, all right, I'll leave that as far as that is. Thank you very much, Ms. Pagani. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Sterle, and thanks for your questions. It gave me a moment to compose myself because I was so distressed thinking about what a completely un-Australian, ridiculous, bureaucratic situation that family would have found themselves in. And thank you for taking on the decision, Ms. Pagani. All right, we are out of time for you, and Senator Sterle and I are going to have a quick private meeting. So thank you to Angel Flight for coming on today, and please go with our thanks, and we'll be back to you very shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you.